We have some major news right now. There is confusion within the Pentagon over what the term full force means after Donald Trump posted on Truth Social that he's directing the United States military to essentially go into Portland, Oregon against American civilians and authorizing, quote, full force if needed. That term right there, folks, essentially toes the line and potentially violates posse comitatus, which essentially prevents the United States military from acting against Americans, acting as the president's personal police force. And right now, folks within the Pentagon don't know what that term means. And just take a minute and let that sink in. The president of the United States posted something on Truth Social. His Pentagon doesn't know what it means, but it implies the use of the military against American civilians. This is a moment that doesn't call for normalization, it calls for action. No one should normalize the use of the United States military against American civilians, especially not the mainstream media. Spread the word. More to come soon. Follow along for all the news you need to know about and subscribe to my Substack at the link in my bio to support my work.
This morning, the President of the United States announced via his social media pages that he was authorizing the newly named Department of War to use full force and kill American citizens that were protesting him and his regime in democratic cities. This is what he posted, just for reference. Specifically, citizens in the city of Portland. There have already been violent interactions between ICE and military members and citizens in LA, in Chicago, and now he is literally sicking the US military on citizens in Portland. This is every bit as serious and as bad as it sounds, and I really feel like we are actually underreacting to this. I want to also point out that he is deliberately referring to anyone who protests his regime as Antifa. And as we all know, they have tried to label Antifa as a terrorist organization. He is trying to villainize and therefore criminalize his opposition. This is as anti-democratic as it gets.
Somebody inside the Pentagon is messing with Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, and I'm here for it. Check out this quote regarding the secret meeting of generals that Hegseth is having this week. He's having the generals come in and admirals from all over the world, like almost all of them, all 800 of them. Nobody knows why. It's kind of creepy. Somebody keeps leaking stuff that makes Hegseth look bad. Look at this quote, okay? People with knowledge said the former Fox personality intends to make a video of his brief address to the generals. Brief, mind you, brief. Halfway around the world just for a brief address, which will focus on military standards and culture, and that he asked for top brass, the top generals, because, quote, guys with the stars on their shoulders make for a better audience from an optics standpoint. He's bringing them as props. He wanted the generals because they have stars on their shoulders and that'll look good in his propaganda video. That is going to piss these guys off. The thing is, somebody leaked that. Somebody leaked it to make him look bad. Whether that's true or not, who knows? This was on purpose to make Hegseth look bad. Also, yesterday they leaked that his big reason for the talk is to talk about grooming and hygiene. Could you imagine bringing a bunch of generals from halfway around the world to talk about deodorant? They smell bad, they need to shave more. And another leak said he's going to lecture them on the new warrior ethos of the Pentagon because now they're about making war and winning, no more of this crazy DEI stuff. Really, you're going to lecture generals who have been there for 40 years, fighting all over the world, that what they've been doing has been bogus pansy stuff. And now you're going to have them be real men and real warriors. They're going to learn to be real warriors under you. Oh, they're going to love that. I think it's BS. I think what he's doing is bringing them because he's planning on telling them we've got really horrible anti-democratic things planned the next 4 years, maybe even martial law, and you better get with the program or get out. But somebody inside the Pentagon is leaking this stuff to make Hegseth look bad, and it's glorious.
Breaking news, Donald Trump has told Pete Hegseth, Secretary of War, to use the military in Portland, Oregon with full force authorization. Yes, that means killing American citizens. And the real president, Stephen Miller, is also talking about initiating and activating the joint terrorism task forces all across America to target liberals and Democrats, calling them radical extremist terrorists. This is a direct call for political violence. We need to call this out. We cannot let them gaslight us. They want political violence. They want civil conflict. They want something to happen in Oregon so they can justify more authoritarian government overreach. That's what they want. In Nazi Germany, they renamed the Ministry of Defense the Ministry of War as well, because they believe in ruling by domination and ruling by violence and having no checks and balances whatsoever with authoritarian rule. That is the definition of fascism. They are going to claim that Antifa is funded by every Democratic group, every Democratic voter, every Democratic PAC, every Democratic nonprofit, every liberal nonprofit. They are going to say we are all complicit in violent leftist terrorism. They are trying to find a pretext to do whatever they want with liberals in America. We need to respond to them. We need Democrats who can actually talk on a camera, not Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer, to respond to this. I swear, they think we are still debating healthcare policy with Paul Ryan. They don't understand this moment whatsoever. This is a really scary situation. We do know actual organized militias in America. It's not Antifa. It's the Proud Boys. It's all these different Patriot Front groups that did January 6th, that Trump pardoned. Not once did Joe Biden say we should use the military to go after people like that. And there's far more of a reason to be worried about them, but that's not what we do in America. We use law enforcement separate from the military for a reason, because we care about freedom in America. The king we escaped from as a country used the military and violence as a political pawn. We created our country to get away from that, but now the Trumpists want to take us back in that direction with their Stalinist cult. Please drop a like, repost this video, and follow my page. We need to keep on talking about this and spreading awareness as much as possible. They are doing an all-out blitz because Trump's popularity is collapsing. The Epstein files are still a big topic that they are so scared to release. We know Trump was involved heavily. Elon Musk now. Elon Musk's father was involved. We know that Peter Thiel and all the Steve Bannon involved. They need to cover this up. Trump is super unpopular. This is one of their biggest authoritarian pushes of all time because they are desperate. Don't forget they are desperate. The public is leaving them. Don't be scared. Stay safe, but keep on messaging, keep on advocating, keep on fighting for freedom like Americans have always done it. Do it peacefully and do it through democracy. Please drop a like again. Please follow me. Share this around. Leave a comment.
Good morning, peeps. How y'all doing? Today is Saturday, September 27th, 2025. Hope you had a good Friday night. I got some good sleep last night. It's my dog. Anyway, racking my brain trying to think of something meaningful to say today, and I got nothing. Everything I want to say is stuff that I've already said hundreds of times about the problems in this country and what we're all facing. We're all suffering because the rich don't want to pay taxes and they don't want to pay for labor. We got a psychotic, racist death cult doing everything they can to run this country into the ground, and they're succeeding. Meanwhile, we're all just, struggling and stressed out. And, we all know what needs to be done, but none of us want to take the first step to do it, because that would mean jeopardizing what little we have, and it's just fucked up. I'm still, every day I wake up, I'm like, how much more of this are we going to put up with? It's just, if you'd have, told a lot of people a year ago that we're going to be in this situation right now with this authoritarian regime that just obliterated the Constitution, took away all our rights, fucking ran our country into the ground, fucking had the secret police running around, kidnapping people, and all the stuff that they're doing with our tax dollars, and they're going to raise our taxes and take away all the good stuff that the government is supposed to do for us. We're like, what? Really? I'm tired of hearing about what rich people want and what rich people think. There's way more of us, and they may own the country, but we run it. Never forget that. They think that they can just dispose of us, just to squeeze every last fucking penny out of us and work us to death and not have any repercussions. They're wrong. And they're going to find out soon enough. I just wonder how soon. Anyway, think about that. Have a good day, everyone.
I just woke up 20 minutes ago, and I woke up to our president calling for war against United States citizens, calling for war against his own people, calling for the full force of the military to be used against United States citizens. At the request of Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem, I am directing Secretary of War Pete Hegseth to provide all necessary troops to protect war-ravaged Portland and any of our ICE facilities under siege from attack by Antifa and other domestic terrorists. I'm also authorizing full force if necessary. Thank you for your attention to this matter. This is the President of the United States calling for the full force of the military against his own people. And Antifa or any other domestic terrorist, so anybody protesting this is going to get the full force of the military. This is actually terrifying. If you are out in Portland protesting today, please be so careful.
Hey, Anthony.
Yeah.
What do you think about Trump's post today that he's deploying troops in Portland, Oregon at full force?
I think it's another step in the Trump administration's plan to completely disregard posse comitatus and desensitize the American people to the use of military force against them.
What is posse comitatus?
The Posse Comitatus Act is a federal law that was passed in 1878, shortly after the Civil War and Reconstruction, that basically forbids the use of military personnel for domestic law enforcement. So it says the military cannot be used against U.S. citizens, especially on U.S. land, with certain exceptions by, Constitution or Congress. That applies to National Guard as well as actual military troops. Although, if you actually look historically, there's been a lot of times where it's basically been completely disregarded. Nonetheless, it is still a law that prevents the use of military in the ways that the Trump administration has been and is continuing to try and use them against mainly leftist cities as a, occupy an army to quell protests against his administration's fascist policies.
What does full force mean?
I don't think there's necessarily a definition for full force as a military term. I'm not a military expert, so I could be wrong on that, but to me it sounds like it means exactly what it sounds like, right? Which is that he's authorizing the use of lethal force. Basically, he's authorizing the National Guard or whatever military he's planning on sending, could also be the Marines he's used before, to shoot at American citizens to prevent protests against his administration, both for their fascist policies and for the continued questions to release the Epstein files, which is part of what the protests are going on about.
Why is he referring to Portland as a war-torn city?
Well, Portland is one of the cities that's been most effective at resisting the Trump administration's deployment of ICE and the National Guard to the city as a means to quell rebellion and protest against the Trump administration's fascist policies, right? I know that in Portland specifically, there's been a lot of protests against ICE's use of various federal buildings in Portland and other buildings as detention centers for people that ICE has picked up, despite the state and city contracts with ICE for those buildings forbidding their use as detention centers. And they've also been very good at just having organized resistance against ICE in a number of different ways to prevent or hinder ISIS movement in the cities. And Trump and Pam Bondi would have you believe that what they're doing is domestic terrorism. They've called it that. They've called the resistance Antifa, which is this very nebulous term that the right uses to try and categorize and demonize any type of leftist rebellion against them, despite the fact that Antifa isn't really some type of organized group like Proud Boys, for example, which is basically a domestic terrorist organization. Antifa is kind of like anonymous, right? It's just this idea that even the words just mean anti-fascist, right? But the Trump administration has declared Antifa, whatever that means, as a domestic terrorist organization, and they're going to be using the label Antifa to label any type of effective protests against them as Antifa-based and try and use that to criminalize protesters for exercising their rights to free speech and freedom of assembly. And Portland, Oregon is just the latest example of them doing that. As one of the well-known, more liberal cities on the West Coast, also is a good target for the Trump administration because it's one of the cities that is hated by MAGA and other Republicans. So, Portland's going to continue to resist, doing very well. But the fact that the Trump administration is basically calling for lethal force against Americans who are exercising their right to protest is another sign of the continued decline into dictatorship in the U.S.
So Mango Mussolini just declared war on Portland, Oregon? Well, he's authorizing full force. Look at this. Is there a war going on in Portland, Oregon? Guys, let me know if I missed that headline. But Mango Mussolini over here took to his not-so-true social to post this. Directing the Secretary of War, Pete Kegsbreath, WikiLeaks himself, to provide all necessary troops to protect the war-ravaged city of Portland, Oregon. What? In all seriousness, guys, the President of the United States has directed the military to enter yet another American city, and the use of full force. What does that even mean? Are we talking law enforcement activities, or are we talking like full military force here? You know what that means. I can't say it. This is disturbing. Peepaw forgot his meds again, yes, but honestly, he's going to keep doing this to blue cities across this country, and any city that does not bend to his whim immediately. This should concern everyone.
Authorizing full force. Let's talk about what that means. So to start us out on the same page, let's just read through the post that was sent out this morning by President Trump. At the request of Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem, which is funny because he kind of places blame on her, I am directing Secretary of War Pete Hegseth to provide all necessary troops to protect war-ravaged Portland and any of our ICE facilities under siege from attack by Antifa and other domestic terrorists. I am also authorizing full force if necessary. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Just remember that comment about at the request of Secretary Noem, because I just have a feeling if things, or when things go south, she'll be, brought to blame. Now, full force is exactly what you think it is. It is the military, our men and women in uniform, having to make the decision between American citizens or not. And unfortunately, we know in our military, there are many, many MAGA who would jump at the opportunity to do the wrong thing. Let's talk about what this looks like if it plays out in worst case scenario, because unfortunately throughout history in many, many countries, there have been instances of the military turning on their own citizens, and the outcomes are rather grim. This is Argentina, and from 1976 to 1983, they experienced under a dictatorship something called the Dirty War. The Dirty War required the military, who answered to that dictator, to go around and find the leftists and the dissenters and anyone who spoke out against then the current regime. People were kidnapped, thrown into vans, sound familiar? Many of them were tortured, many of them ended up dead, and there were just people that were taken. Nobody knows what happened to them. And so all of those that were taken, regardless of if they came back or not, what their experience was, they were called the disappeared or the desaparecidos. Of course, many of us are familiar with the 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre in China. For those that don't know, this was a peaceful protest that was put together by students, and they were calling for reform and democracy under an authoritarian regime. Ultimately, the Chinese military ended up opening fire on the unarmed students, killing hundreds of them. Now, this is a kind of point of contingency among historians because China, being the authoritarian government that it is, hides the numbers, hides reality, hides history. Also sounds familiar. And so it is estimated by some historians that thousands of these students might have been killed that day. Not that long ago, from 2019 until 2022, there were massive protests throughout Iran, and people were protesting many different things: women's rights, fuel prices, government reform, all types of things. It was the Iranian government who decided to use ammo, live ammo, to, I guess, sort of handle the protesters. And it is estimated that thousands were killed during those 3 years. So from a pattern recognition standpoint, what does using full force actually look like? What is the aftermath of an incident or incidents like those that I just described? First and foremost, the short-term effects are that uprisings stop or are paused because people see this actually happening and they take a step back. They are in shock, they are scared, they are unsure about their next move. Long-term, though, is where we would need to look, because long-term, this gets really, really messy because it delegitimizes the regime. So we see this happen. We see the military fire upon us, the American citizens. We say, wait a second, that's not what our government is meant to do. This wakes up people who are not maybe like you and I, who are like living in politics land 24/7. And once the regime is delegitimized, then you have pockets of uprising. So you would see additional incidents around the countries, probably in more populated areas, but we can't rule out rural areas either.
And this ultimately ends in violent conflict. So for an undetermined amount of time, because obviously we can't see the future, you are going to have violence in the streets of the United States. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Is my pattern recognition on point? Am I going too far down the rabbit hole? I don't know. But I just wanted to look at a little bit of history and compare notes, because when I see full force as an option, I'm waiting for the worst to happen.
Hello everyone, it's Portland City Councilor Angelita Morillo, and as many of you have probably already seen, President Trump posted to Truth Social this morning at around 9 a.m. Eastern Time that he is planning on sending military troops to Portland, Oregon. It's no surprise to me that he is doing this to try to intimidate a city that is so valiantly and dedicatedly going to stand up for immigrants. But it really does remind me that when I first came to the United States from Paraguay with my mother and sister when I was 4 years old, and we had nothing in our apartment, the one thing that we did have was a massive American flag on the wall, because my mother believed that it was a sign that we had made it and that her daughters would get to live a better life here. As our country has descended into fascism over the past few years, a lot of people have said, I don't recognize my country anymore. And I have to push back on that, because that's exactly what this country was built upon. It was built on separating Black families who were sold into slavery. It was built on murdering indigenous people who were also separated from their families and sold into slavery. And now the chickens are coming home to roost, and we are seeing the modern day version of that with immigrants. I don't know where this is all going to end up, but I do know this. Our country, our people, and especially the city of Portland is not going to accept this from any federal administration. Now, last night we heard the news very last minute, and the city of Portland held a press conference along with county and congressional leadership to message out that this was happening and for people to be prepared. Fortunately, a lot of the messaging ended up being finger wagging at Portlanders and telling them not to take the bait around protesting, because the federal administration is going to use whatever we do to send the military in. And to that, I would say the streets are looking beautiful. People are at the Saturday market having Negronis, and yet the federal government is sending the military in anyways. And Trump is just making up stories about what's going on in our city that are completely false. So it's hard to imagine that there is anything that we can do to appease a tyrant who is completely unreasonable, illogical, and willing to spread misinformation. I've also seen federal agents attack protesters who are perfectly peaceful, who are just exercising their First Amendment rights. And so it's hard to imagine what type of appeasement or calmness is going to stop them from harming us. And we shouldn't victim blame protesters for what the federal government is about to do when they are illegally encroaching upon our own city. And that being said, I want all of us to be extremely wise, deliberate, and careful in what actions we are taking or not taking over the next few weeks and months, because we are walking a delicate tightrope of not complying in advance while also not giving the federal government a reason to enact further violence. So what I have to say to Portlanders is to be extremely careful, to center the lives of those who are directly impacted, and to really think about what actions you're taking and why, and that I trust your judgment. I also want to say that we are not organizing under regular times anymore. You cannot organize the way that you did before. Your phone is a tracker. It is tracking everything that you do. It is listening to you. There are facial recognition technology cameras on a lot of federal buildings. You should not be bragging about anything that you're doing on social media or to strangers or to people that you don't know or trust. What you need to do right now is to join an organization collectively organized to protect our neighbors and not comply in advance, while also being wise, careful, and deliberate. I highly recommend that folks get connected to groups like the Portland Immigrant Rights Coalition. They have triaging groups that actually address ICE in different neighborhoods. You should be joining that type of thing. I also want every single person to save the hotline number for if you spot ICE. The number is 1-888-622-1510. This is their emergency hotline, so if you spot ICE in a neighborhood, you can call them, they can get that data, and they can move people into action. For folks who are reporting ICE activity, I also highly recommend the CLEAR model, which stands for Count, Location, Equipment, Activity, and Report Time. If you can safely take photos, that's also really helpful. We do not want a bunch of misinformation to spread if ICE agents are not actually doing something, or if you see a white van and it scares you, that doesn't necessarily mean it's an ICE agent. So please use your discretion and make sure that you're verifying sources before spreading unnecessary fear. I will be giving updates on my social media as transparently and safely as I can. And Portland, I just want you to remember that we are a city of fighters. We have never backed down from protecting our neighbors from fascists, and we are not going to start today. So please just be careful, organize with your neighbors, and know that we have your back, and I know that you have ours. We are going to get through this.
But apparently a lot of people think that Charlie Kirk was like good at debating, and I would completely disagree.
Charlie Kirk was considered a good debater for two reasons: American Christocentrism and American conceptions of masculinity and patriarchy. Do y'all remember when Charlie Kirk went to debate in Cambridge and he was utterly destroyed? And he wasn't just destroyed through the students' argumentation, he was also destroyed because of the debate tactics that he typically uses, which are mostly intimidation, and using his masculinity to make others feel small was not received well by the audience. Before I show the most viral part of that debate, which was his debate with a student regarding abortion, I want to show you the initial student who asked a question and watch how he tries to use his masculinity and his identity to pressure and malign and make the student feel small. You can tell he feels destabilized when the audience isn't responding well to these shows of power, because these shows of power are not the same thing as having good faith intellectual debate. They're a way to intimidate and denigrate the opponent. And this style was well received on American college campuses, but not so well received within the Cambridge debate process. Let's take a look.
I have quite a simple question for you. Now, I know you've debated Dean Withers on Jubilee before. I was wondering why you now refuse to engage with further debate with him.
Summer, and let me get this straight. I flew 5,000 miles across the world to have you ask why I'm not going to debate a left-wing YouTuber. Debated him twice in the last calendar year. He's coming on my show this summer. Let me be clear. I came to Cambridge to have you ask me that.
This aspect of the debate right here reminds me of Mark Zuckerberg's comments earlier this year that we need more masculinity in the workplace. And this was a thinly veiled way for Mark Zuckerberg to say we need to insulate the power of men within the workplace. And I think what's interesting about tying that to how Charlie Kirk debated is we can see that masculinity is not about engaging the other, or shows of power and patriarchy are not about engaging the other. It's about intimidating your opponent, making your opponent feel small. And within the American debate process, and also within the American workplace, we tend to conflate masculinity with intellect. We tend to conflate masculinity with good leadership. But actually, it's just intellectual bullying. And when you actually have students who are prepared to engage in the debate, you can see that Charlie Kirk is not quite ready to come to the table and have a good faith conversation. Now, Charlie Kirk's time debating in Cambridge didn't only display how the U.S. rewards patriarchal displays of power, it also showed how much of America's debates and American debate culture is based upon Christocentrism. What you'll notice when Charlie Kirk debates the student in the next clip regarding abortion is he cannot debate when the other person does not have the same moral framework as him, because he's often using Christian apologetics to bully his opponent, to confuse them about morality and what is right and what is wrong, and to rope them into a Christocentric conversation. But the moment God is not the moral framework through which they are debating, particularly a Christian nationalist conception of God, he deeply struggles to come to the table and have a good intellectual conversation.
What is it that gives human being this moral worth?
Not its consciousness necessarily.
I didn't say it's consciousness.
I know that I can imagine it because it is a human being, because that has a soul.
And what is this soul? Where does this come from? This idea that it's...
Exactly. I mean, again, the Greeks postulated that it is the entirety of your being. Okay, you guys can laugh. I mean, it's true. I mean,
there's a lot more to unpack here, but I'm so glad we're starting to have the conversation around how Charlie Kirk debated, because it relates to other concepts that are very popular within American culture. The idea that men are better leaders, the idea that shows of patriarchal power are the same as good faith debate, the idea that Christocentrism needs to be the framework through which we understand our collective morality. There's so much to consider. And as someone who is an organizational consultant, I see these same ideas seep into the workplace. Again, the idea that men are better leaders, the idea that intellectual bullying is a show of leadership and strength, the idea that we need to have one moral framework that runs our workplaces versus considering how to marginalized communities consider what a healthy workplace culture is. There's so much to consider here, and I'm curious your thoughts in the comments. And thanks so much for watching. My name is Ciara. I'm a consultant and a progressive theologian, so follow me for more content like this.